Welcome back to the Inn at the End. Unfortunately, our adventuring party could not be gathered here to provide you with your regularly scheduled entertainment. But fret not. One of our hosts has arrived to provide you with some entertainment regardless. I think I see him there now. Why don't you grab a seat and I'll bring you a drink.
Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Hey guys, Rhett here, riding solo at the inn today. So sorry that we can't bring you our regular adventure, but life does happen when you step outside the doors of the inn at the end to return to real life. So, instead of gallivanting through the fantastic streets of High Rock, I'm going to read you one of my short stories, originally published in the 5th issue of a magazine called Whetstone Amateur Magazine of Sword and Sorcery. It was originally written as a kind of a spin-off or an homage to one of my characters that you might have heard if you've been a long-time listener of the Inn at the End, all the way back to the Chaotic Amateurs days. He was a monster hunter named Strummer, who originally was kind of a Kenku ranger, but, you know, when you're writing your own things and you take little pieces of the stuff that you like, you know, having a little bird guy wasn't what I thought was cool at the time. So Strummer is just kind of an outlander-ish, kind of outsider guy, who I always thought of as a ranger, but I guess other people might think of as a bard, because he carries around a mandolin. Anyway, the story is called The Seven Sealed Flask, and it was blurbed thus by the publisher. An raucous tavern on the edge of civilization, an itinerant rogue with a mandolin finds a familiar face, a world of trouble, and a dangerous fissure in reality. Ooh. If you end up liking what you are hearing when I read this, you can read another Strummer story, recently published in the December 2025 issue. I believe it's issue number 41 of the Savage Realms monthly magazine, available on the Amazon and Kindle store. I'd really appreciate it if, you know, you wanted to pick it up and read it and leave a rating and a review based on what you read of my story, which is called Black Fruit and is almost a direct sequel of this one. Anyway, I digress. Let's zoom in on this raucous tavern on the edge of civilization and see what happens in the Seven Sealed Flask.
The Seven Sealed Flask by Rhett Weisenfels. On the far fringes of the world are things unimaginable, where the details of the map become faded and tea-stained, and cartographers settle for cryptic conjunctions like, "Here there be monsters." There in the corner of the map, one might find the name Balhiric, writ bold and dark in fine southern inks. The borders of the walled city, penned with a heavy hand, are locked in battle with an impending, faded tangle of wilderness, stretching to the tattered edge. They call this corner of the map the Borderlands. Here, where the tidy, clean lines of civilization buck up against the unimaginable, lies the gleaming city of Balhiric, where body soldiers drink and gamble away their fortunes. Princes and patricians barter and trade prospects at fantastic sums, and wishes come true for those with the wit and will to seize them. On a crowded street, outside a tavern called Tiny's, stood Strummer, named thus for his skill with a mandolin, and later his skill with a bow. He pulled his cowl close and peered through an old axe wound in the wall from which pungent smoke evacuated like vapor from a kettle, carrying with it the scent of tobacco from 3 continents and kush from the neighboring kingdoms. This was his 3rd tavern of the night. It was hardly different from the rest. The din spilled into the streets, and under flickering lanterns, people guzzled sour wine and dark beers. Music carried above the clamor, and the rattling of dice and coins was borne from a dozen tables. But laughter was the language of this place, and it mingled with a dozen more as stories poured from their tellers' mouths like ale from a tap. Pike had to be here. Strummer was running out of time. Any later and he'd have to find an empty stable to rest. It meant another day in the city, but he'd borne worse. Things were simpler beyond the walls, but... Fortune spared him, however. He heard Pike before he saw him. It was his laugh, coarse, smoke-laden, and rich as a glass of brandy. His words were lost to the racket, but it was clear he was in the middle of a tall tale. Pike loved to spin a yarn. No one paid Strummer any mind when he entered Tiny's. He was just another face, outlander or not. Pike had attracted quite the entourage. They laughed, hollered, and raised their glasses at all the right moments. "Never seen anything like it," Pike burst as Strummer drew closer. 30 hands high. No, 35. The beast towered over me, its beaked maw caked in blood and bone, and when it stretched its mangy wings, its span was thrice my own. Pike paused for a hearty draught of beer and was heckled by a drunken fool who muttered about dragons. "Dragons?" Pike scoffed. "The lindworms are nothing, friend. My spear grows tired of tasting the lizard's blood." Raised in the wild, Strummer knew firsthand the importance of timing. He wasn't going to get a better opening. "I seem to recall the drake tasting of yours once or twice," he said. A few bitter lackeys barred steel at the slight, but Pike stayed them with a raised hand and dragged on a hand-rolled cigarette. "By the divine wind, Strummer?" The rogues covered their blades and settled to their seats, eager to listen in. "It is you. I thought for sure when that man-faced lion dragged you off, it would have stripped the meat from your bones and left you for a skeleton." Pike kicked over an empty chair, took a drag, and continued. "Tell me, how in the holiest of hells did you manage that?" Smoke wafted out of his nose. "Simple. She never had the pleasure to hear an instrument such as mine and bid me play." Pike managed to hide his surprise better than the rest of the table, who erupted into laughter. "So you stayed the beast with your melodies?" "And more," Strummer offered. "I regaled her with tales of ancient and savage lands. I juggled and played children's games, and I sang sweet songs about loves won and lost." At that, Tiny's whooped and hollered. The tavern enjoyed a long fit of riotous laughter, and just when Strummer began to fear he was the butt of a joke he didn't understand, someone placed a tall mug of sour wine before him. After a time, folks returned to their own conversations, leaving Pike and Strummer alone to talk, so Pike leaned in close and said, "You look troubled." He watched Strummer take a long pull of his wine and let the silence punctuate the question. "You ever been bloodbound?" Strummer asked. Pike shook his head slow, too slow. "I made a trade," Strummer continued, "a name for a promise." "A blood oath? How exactly did you step into that viper's nest?" Pike probed carefully. "Remember Carcone?" Strummer asked. Pike gave a terse nod. "The wind spirit?" "Exactly, except it wasn't just a wind spirit." Strummer reached into his satchel, producing a leaden flask. It was battered, like he found it after it tumbled down the face of a mountain and bore a brass seal stamped with a 7-pointed star. It was impressive just how little Pike gave away. His lips moved, but his eyes did not, carefully avoiding the flask. "Is it full?" Pike asked. Strummer tipped it carefully to its side and, with a single finger, rolled it across the table where Pike plucked it up a little too quickly. "Empty," Strummer confirmed, "but I'm hoping to change that." "It's here?" Pike feigned the perfect amount of ignorance. "Does the name Pavel Bodiska mean anything to you?" Pike shook his head. "You see, it should. It's your name. Well, it's Pike's name. I'm not surprised you don't know it. No one does. His mama gave it to me. Imagine how tickled I was when that seer could have said any name, and they spoke Pavel Bodiska. It's almost enough to make me believe in fate. That's the name, Pike, or the thing inside Pike, said. Now what's the promise? Strummer raised his chin to the flask. Across the table, the thing in Pike abandoned all pretense. The careful attention to tics and expressions was fading. Moment by moment, an entirely different person came to sit in his place. What I can't figure out, Strummer began, is how long you've been in there. Was it really Carcone? It was subtle, but in the air thrummed a dark power. It moved with its own rhythm, corrupting and controlling the minds of dozens nearby. The piper's melody evaporated. The barkeep began a third polish on the mug he held, and then a fourth. But worse was the unsettling number of patrons that now barred steel. What gave it away? They asked in unison, with smiles distorted and sideways. Outside these walls, you learn to see things for what they really are, Strummer answered. And Pike... Well, Pike never liked me. With a nod, steel lifted into the air, and all hell broke loose. In a blur, Strummer kicked his chair backwards and rolled to his feet. Steel blurred by his face and bit deep into the table where he'd sat. Strummer pounced. In one fluid motion, he drew his short blade and separated the axe from its master, somewhere near the elbow. Careful of his footing, he hooked a step into the man's open stance and checked him, catching his heel and sending him smashing through a table, blood arcing from his new stump. Only luck kept his gut from becoming a sheath for a wicked curved sword. He almost missed it, but the edge caught on Strummer's guard and somehow he deflected it to the floor where he snapped it with his boot heel. Then, lightning quick, Strummer unceremoniously plunged his sword through his foe. Strummer's ferocity was chilling. Chaos reigned, and people screamed as blood spilled. Fire licked at the floor and found oil from a shattered lamp. Anyone not ensorcelled fled into the street, screaming for the night watchman. Fighting had always felt like a dance to Strummer, one which required new steps for every foe. The rhythm settled over him, and he clearly saw every move before it was made. He held his blade close, careful never to overextend. He kept his footing light, ready to dance around rising flames, and he kept his assault constant and unyielding. For every parry, Strummer mustered a riposte. He counterattacked thrice over for every arc of steel that tested him. As the flames grew, the being in Pike could no longer sit idle. He dropped the seven-sealed flask, moved his hand through ancient spells, and muttered dreadful incantations. His eyes burned like coal fire, and Strummer could sense the magics he brought to bear. But as impressive as his somatics were, they were useless against the mandolinist, for he came prepared with more than strength and steel. "Your foul sorcery won't work tonight," warned Strummer. "I know your true name, Zoba Jin, Zoba Stormseeker." For the first time, Strummer heard its voice, resonant and baleful. "So be it," Zoba boomed, and brought his will to bear upon the tavern itself. Sweeping his arms up, he conjured a gust of wind that gathered the flames together. In a mere moment, an inferno raged through the tavern. While in possession of his true name, Zoba could not directly impose his will on Strummer, but with the fire, he wouldn't need to. Strummer bounded across the room, deftly avoiding spent mugs and empty bottles, leaping over the bar as a gout of fire sang overhead, singeing the hairs on the back of his neck. "You hope to imprison me," Zoba said. "The humor is not lost on me." This would only end with Zoba dead or captured. Strummer didn't possess the means to kill an elder being now in the middle of Balhiric, but the means of its capture rested on the floor scant paces away. Planting a palm flat on the bar, Strummer vaulted over it like a ball of lightning and tore across the room like a tornado. He wove a red web of death about him. Each foe was eager and defiant, and each foe that stood in his path was destroyed. Another gout of fire streamed past Strummer, forcing him into another incoming attack. He caught his assailant's wrist overhead and thrust his blade into their belly, wrenching and moving them through the steps of a fatal waltz. As two more foes flanked him, Strummer found his hostage an effective shield. He drew his sword out of the man like he was carving a deer and let his insides spill to the floor, and he shoved the corpse at one while he pounced on the other, his sword making quick work of each. The flask lay just beyond Strummer's reach now, and only Zoba blocked his path. His eyes burned blue, and sloughs of pike melted to the floor, revealing taut blue skin beneath. Strummer only needed a moment. There was no hope of a fair fight, and no hope of survival if he didn't get that flask. Zoba was powerful beyond measure, but he was still bound to Pike, so Strummer took a chance, lurching for a lamp on a nearby table, and hurled it at Zoba's face. Glass shattered and freed the oil within, and by luck or providence, the oil took to flame, blinding the djinn. It was the only opening Strummer would get. Now it was a race. Strummer's legs burned with life, each step carrying him farther than he thought possible. His sword left his hand, and time stretched out before him as he read Zoba's blind thrashing like a storm on the horizon. Fire gathered under the djinn, coalescing into a fiery cyclone that lifted him off the ground. His limbs flailed, and he lashed blindly with maleficent magics. This was his chance. Strummer drew upon all of his grace and power. All he could see was the flask. He leapt and bounded and vaulted, dancing between a dozen different deaths. And it was his. Scrabbling across the floor, Strummer clutched the flask as tenderly and as fiercely as a mother and her newborn babe. He wasted no time popping the seal, rolling to his back, and pointed the open mouth at the eye of a hurricane. "By the lords of Atlantis, I bid you, Zoba, Blue One, Zoba Genie, surrender peacefully or I swear you'll suffer." The flask came alive. It was dull and worn one moment. The next, it was dazzling with octarine brilliance. It pulsed in his hand like a beating heart and quickened when it sensed Zoba. "You feckless cur," Zoba barked as magic gripped him. "I was there when you apes crawled from the primordial oceans. You are nothing." "Zoba Genie, Zoba Trickster, Zoba the Wind Waker, I bid you surrender now!" From between the pieces of pike that remained, Zoba was drawn like juice from a lemon, and true panic took root inside him. "What do you desire? Gold? Power? Flesh? Everyone has a price, Strummer. Name yours." Zoba strained against the power of the flask. "I have debts that even you can't pay, djinn." Zoba was now a parasite drawn from its host, his true shape taking form before Strummer's eyes. Even half-bound beneath Pike's skin, Zoba was eminent and terrifying. But the strain was too much for what remained of Pike, and his body collapsed, writhing in agony. "You take me, and he dies," Zoba promised. "If he dies, he dies. You sealed his fate long ago." Then, rather unceremoniously, Zoba was consumed into the flask, leaving behind the overwhelming scent of brimstone. Strummer replaced the stopper and fixed the flask at his belt. Pike lay face down in the blaze. His bloodied body was beginning to blister. The tavern was lost, but Strummer couldn't leave him behind, so he grabbed Pike's hands and dragged him through the ruin. Strummer was surprised when others entered into the inferno, shouting curses and issuing orders to those on the street. They helped him pull Pike to safety. There would be questions when they pulled more bodies out. The nature and origin of their wounds would arouse suspicion, and Strummer couldn't provide answers. But his exhaustion ran deep. There would be no escape from the city tonight. So instead, Strummer propped Pike against a horse stall across the street and collapsed next to him. Using his mandolin to occupy his idle hands, his fingers found a gentle melody, and Strummer sang soft and sweet while they watched the tavern burn.
That's it for this week, listener. We appreciate your patience while we wrangle our adventurers back into the gaming room. If you liked this story, you can find it and others on Rhett's Ko-Fi blog at ko-fi.com/RhettIsAwesome, or go to rhettisawesome.com.